What if I told you that the most dangerous person in a luxurious mansion was not the millionaire with his connections, but the quiet woman in a black dress standing in the shadows? In an era when reputation was worth more than gold, it was these inconspicuous figures who held the keys to the fates of the most influential ladies in society. We are used to seeing glittering balls, rustling silks, and the perfect facades of houses from the Gilded Age. But behind closed doors, a different, frightening reality was hidden. Wealth and titles could not protect the mistress of the house from the cold, appraising gaze of her own maid, who knew every secret and every weakness. The silence of the servants was a commodity that was bought and sold, and one wrong gesture or meaningful glance could destroy a life faster than a loud scandal in the newspapers. This is a story about women who lived in golden cages, and those who held the keys to those cages, watching, judging, and sometimes punishing without a word. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how ordinary understatement and a timely lowered gaze could destroy New York's greatest socialite. Want to know a secret that could change your perception of the private lives of the aristocracy? The most intimate and vulnerable place in the house was not the couple's bedroom, but the mistress's boudoir, where morning and evening dressing rituals took place. It was here, in this confined space filled with the scents of powder and perfume, that the line between mistress and maid was blurred, turning the latter into a dangerous witness. A lady of high society was physically unable to dress herself. The complex construction of corsets, numerous petticoats, and fastenings at the back required the help of others. The maid saw her mistress's body every day, noticing the slightest changes, bruises that had to be hidden with powder, or trembling hands before an important reception. She knew when her mistress had gained weight from nervous overeating or, conversely, had lost weight from sleepless nights and secret worries. In those early morning hours, while lacing up their shoes, mistresses often let their guard down, forgetting that they were not talking to a friend, but to a hired worker. They could afford to sigh heavily, drop a careless remark about their husband, or leave a note on the dressing table that should not be read by outsiders. The maid absorbed this information, maintaining an outward calm and continuing to comb her mistress's hair. The chambermaid's power lay in the fact that she was the guardian of her mistress's physical and emotional appearance. She could choose a dress that would emphasize the fatigue on her face or tighten her corset so tightly that the lady could barely breathe and smile at the ball. The slightest carelessness in the hairstyle or a barely noticeable stain on a glove, accidentally missed by the maid, became a signal to society that all was not well in this house. Often, chambermaids became unwitting accomplices in concealing traces of family drama. They washed tear-stained handkerchiefs and applied cold compresses to swollen eyes, listening to excuses about migraines. But it was their silent knowledge of the truth that made the mistress a hostage to her own staff. The paradox was that the richer the lady was, the less right she had to privacy. Her body, her health, her mood, everything belonged to the watchful gaze of a woman who received a modest salary. This created a monstrous imbalance, where external power belonged to the mistress and internal power belonged to the maid. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about such a total loss of personal space for the sake of social norms? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us to the place where all urban legends were born? While upstairs in the light-filled living rooms, music played and polite conversations took place, downstairs in the kitchens and servants' quarters, real life was in full swing. It was a kind of shadow information center where reputations were destroyed over a cup of strong tea and a piece of cake. Servants from different houses formed a close-knit, closed caste, bound by professional solidarity and a thirst for news. The footman standing behind the chair during a dinner party was invisible to the guests, but his ears caught every word, every whisper, and every clatter of a fallen fork. Everything that happened in the dining room was immediately retold downstairs, embellished with details and interpretations. Information traveled between mansions at an alarming speed, outpacing official visits and letters. When cooks met at the market or butlers exchanged bows on the street, they passed pieces of the mosaic to each other. From these fragments, a complete picture of the financial situation, marital infidelities, and secret vices of every noble family in the city was pieced together. Silence in this case was a collective weapon against those who violated the unwritten rules of treating staff. If the mistress was rude, stingy, or unfair, the servants could organize a reputation boycott against her. They simply stopped refuting rumors about her, or worse, confirmed them with meaningful silence when asked by other servants. This underground information network showed no mercy to those who tried to appear better than they really were. The hypocrisy of high society was the main subject of ridicule and discussion in the basement rooms. The servants saw the underside of luxury: dirty laundry, empty bottles, fake smiles, and this knowledge gave them a sense of moral superiority. Female servants, being socially powerless, wielded enormous power over the social capital of their employers. They could create the image of a saintly martyr for one and a promiscuous woman for another, simply by choosing what to say and what to keep quiet about. Their stories shaped public opinion long before it took shape in high society salons. It was often through servants that scandalous information found its way into the tabloid press, which was beginning to gain momentum in those years. Journalists knew that for a small fee, they could get an offended maid or a dismissed footman to talk. Thus, family secrets became public knowledge, completely destroying the family's reputation. Ready to learn how nonverbal cues became a death sentence for high society? In the next chapter, we will reveal the art of the killer stare. What I am about to show you was forbidden in 12 countries of etiquette at the time, but it happened everywhere. In a world of strict rules and ceremonies, where open rebellion was impossible, servants honed the art of passive aggression to a high level. They didn't need to be rude to humiliate the hostess or her guest. A microscopic pause or a barely noticeable gesture was enough. Imagine a situation where a guest whose reputation was questionable came to visit a respectable home. The butler or footman might open the door a fraction of a second slower than usual, or accept her calling card with their fingertips as if it were contagious. It was a message that was instantly understood. You are not welcome here, and we know who you are. At the table, the servants could accidentally bypass the unwelcome lady with a dish, or pour her slightly less wine than the others. These pinpricks were invisible to most, but painfully felt by the victim, who sensed the atmosphere of contempt thickening around her. The servants acted as a single organism, rejecting the foreign element. A special kind of psychological pressure was the loud silence in the presence of the hostess. When the lady entered the room and the lively conversation of the servants instantly stopped, replaced by a deathly silence, it created a feeling of isolation and paranoia. The mistress understood that they were talking about her, but she could not make any complaints because formally the rules had been followed. The glances exchanged by the maids behind their mistress's back could be more eloquent than any words. A barely noticeable raised eyebrow, a slight smirk at the corners of the lips, or a deliberately indifferent face, all of this undermined the mistress's authority. She felt like an actress on stage in front of a hostile audience. Such behavior on the part of the servants often reflected society's attitude toward a particular woman. If society began to turn away from her, the servants were the first to sense it and change their behavior. They were a barometer of social success, and their coldness foreshadowed a coming storm. Like this if you are impressed by this sophisticated system of signs, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how paper became more dangerous than dynamite? In an era when there were no phones or messengers, all personal life, intrigues, and secret feelings were entrusted to paper and ink. Letters were the lifeblood of high society, and servants were the ones who controlled this flow, holding the fate of their mistresses in their hands. Every letter that entered or left the house passed through the hands of the butler, footman, or maid. They saw the handwriting, knew the frequency of correspondence, and could accurately determine who the message was from: a dressmaker, relatives, or a secret admirer. The very fact of receiving a letter at an unusual time could be a cause for suspicion and gossip. Many maids were skilled in the art of discreetly opening envelopes over the steam from a teapot. This allowed them to read the contents without leaving any traces of interference, and to be privy to their mistress's most intimate secrets. Knowledge of debts, forbidden love, or family quarrels gave servants enormous power and opportunities for blackmail. Often a letter could be accidentally lost or placed on the wrong tray. If a maid wanted to harm her mistress, she could place a letter from her lover in a conspicuous place where her husband could find it. Or conversely, she could forget to pass on an important invitation, causing the lady to miss a significant event and find herself in an awkward position. Passing notes was a risky operation in which servants played a key role as intermediaries. They could agree to deliver a secret message for a reward, but their loyalty was always in question. At any moment, they could betray their mistress by giving the note to her husband or rival if they offered a higher price. The fear that their correspondence would become known to the servants forced the ladies to resort to humiliating tricks. They hid letters in their underwear, sewed them into the lining of their dresses, or tried to deliver them personally, which only heightened the suspicions of the staff. Attempts to hide something from those who cleaned your room were doomed to failure from the outset. Letters were the only tangible evidence of sins that could be stolen and presented. Therefore, the attitude towards mail in wealthy homes was paranoid. Housewives knew that what was written with a pen could not be cut out with an axe, especially if the axe was in the hands of an offended maid. How difficult do you think it is to live knowing that even your personal thoughts on paper are not safe? In the next chapter, you will learn how servants became the moral judges of their masters. In Victorian society and the Gilded Age, there was a strict moral code, the violation of which was punishable by exclusion from the circle of the elite. But the first and most severe judges were not the society matrons, but the servants themselves. They lived by their own conservative rules and expected their masters to behave impeccably, in keeping with their high status. For servants, working in a good house was a matter of prestige and personal reputation. If the mistress behaved inappropriately, it cast a shadow on the entire staff. A maid would be ashamed to admit in a shop or church that she served a lady about whom there were dirty rumors. Therefore, servants often became guardians of morality, condemning their masters more severely than the church. When the mistress crossed the line, the atmosphere in the house changed instantly. Respect disappeared, replaced by cold detachment and hidden contempt. The servants continued to perform their duties, but did so mechanically, without their former care and devotion, making it clear that the mistress was no longer worthy of their sincere service. Sometimes servants would resign en masse from a house they considered immoral. This was a loud signal to the whole community. The mass departure of staff was a scandal that could not be hidden, and it spoke more about the moral character of the family than any gossip. Old servants who had served the family for decades perceived the mistress's moral decline as a personal tragedy. Their silent grief and reproachful glances were the worst punishment for the woman they had perhaps nursed as a child. Losing the respect of an old nanny or butler meant losing touch with one's roots and traditions. In this strange symbiosis, the servants acted as the conscience of the house. They reminded their employers of the rules they were trying to break. Their presence was a constant reminder that wealth and privilege had to be paid for with impeccable behavior. Thus, wealthy women found themselves under double pressure, from high society outside and from their own staff inside. And while it was possible to hide from the spotlight behind the walls of a mansion, there was nowhere to hide from the gaze of one's servants. Guess what happened next when a simple wooden door became an instrument of execution? The front door of a mansion was not just an entrance to the building, it was a filter separating the elite from the plebeians, friends from enemies. And the guardian of this portal was the butler, a man with the power to decide who was worthy of crossing the threshold and who would remain on the street. The ritual of visits was a complex ceremony with 1,000 nuances. When a guest rang the doorbell, the butler assessed him from head to toe. The phrase, "the mistress is not at home," was a universal code. It could mean that she was really not there, or, much more offensively, that she was there but did not wish to see this particular person. Servants skillfully used this tool to protect or destroy reputations. If the butler wanted to humiliate a visitor, he could make them wait in the hall for too long, hinting at their insignificance. Or, after accepting their card, he could return with an unopened reply, which was tantamount to a slap in the face. But the worst thing happened when the hostess herself found herself in the role of a supplicant. If the servants of another house received a tacit order not to let a particular lady in, they did so with deadly politeness. A door slammed in one's face was the loudest sound in high society, the sound of social ruin. The butler could forget to report the visit of an important person, depriving his mistress of the chance to make a useful acquaintance. Or conversely, he could let in a creditor or a scandalous character at a moment when the cream of society was sitting in the living room. Such mistakes could cost the family its reputation, and it was almost impossible to prove malicious intent. The front door was the border between two worlds. For a woman of that time, to find herself on the other side of this border, to be rejected, meant social death. And the executioners who carried out this sentence were people in livery, with impassive faces, slamming heavy oak doors. The gatekeeper's power was absolute in that brief moment of encounter. He could add a little more coldness, or, conversely, warmth to his voice, sending a signal to everyone around him. Even coachmen and passers-by understood from the doorman's posture how a particular guest was being received in this house. Thus, an ordinary doorway was transformed into a guillotine for reputation, cutting off the unwelcome from high society. And those who were usually overlooked added fuel to this mechanism. But what if clothes could tell more than a face? In the next chapter, you will learn what secrets were kept in the baskets of dirty laundry. The laundry room and wash house were the most remote and hidden corners of the big house. But that was where the dirtiest truths accumulated. The laundresses and matrons, whose hands were red from hot water and lye, knew more about the physical lives of their masters than doctors or priests. Stains on sheets, marks on underwear, the smell of clothes, all were silent witnesses to what went on behind closed bedroom doors. In an era when hygiene and physicality were taboo subjects, the condition of the laundry spoke volumes. Laundry workers saw evidence of illnesses that were hidden from society. Traces of medicine, blood, or specific secretions allowed them to accurately diagnose ailments that were not spoken of aloud, but whispered about by the entire household staff. The relationship between spouses could also be read from the laundry. Laundry workers knew whether a husband and wife slept in the same bed, how often this happened, and whether it happened at all. The absence of certain traces on the marital bed could be as eloquent evidence of cooling feelings or infidelity as their presence. The scent of perfume on a man's shirt that did not belong to the mistress was irrefutable evidence of infidelity. The maids who did the laundry were able to distinguish between scents and knew which perfumes their mistress's rivals used. This knowledge turned ordinary laundry into a detective investigation. Secrets revealed in the laundry room rarely stayed there. Through the housekeeper, they reached the maids, and from them to the footman, and soon the whole house knew that the owner's marriage was a sham and that the mistress suffered from female ailments. This information made the image of a happy family laughable in the eyes of those who served them. Washing was a process of purification, but in a social sense, it often tarnished reputations. Dirty laundry literally became a metaphor for the family's dirty secrets. And those who washed it kept their fingers on the pulse of the most intimate life of the house. High society women, resplendent in silk and lace, were completely exposed to those who washed and starched that lace. No diamonds could hide the stains of truth that showed through the fabric. Competition between socialites was a war where all means were acceptable, and servants acted as chief spies. Wealthy ladies often tried to bribe or win over their rivals' staff in order to obtain exclusive information from the enemy camp. It was a real intelligence network operating behind the backs of unsuspecting victims. Information was currency. Knowing the guest list for a rival's upcoming reception, the menu for her dinner party, or the style of dress she was having made by her dressmaker, all gave a tactical advantage. A maid who was talkative or resentful of her mistress could leak this information in exchange for a small gift or a promise of protection. Information about financial problems was especially valuable. If a rival servant said that the household was skimping on candles or coal, it was a sign of weakness. Such information allowed one to strike at the most inopportune moment, for example, by spreading a rumor of bankruptcy on the eve of an important deal involving a rival's husband. Servants who moved from one house to another were carriers of compromising information. By hiring a maid who had previously served an enemy, a lady hoped to learn all the secrets of her previous place of work. This created an atmosphere of mistrust. Mistresses were afraid to dismiss servants, knowing that they could take dangerous secrets with them. Sometimes servants were used for active disinformation. A mistress might deliberately say something false to a maid, knowing that she would pass it on. It was a complex game in which everyone tried to outsmart each other using the living telegraph of the servants. The feud between the mistresses often spilled over to the servants. The staff of two feuding houses could play petty tricks on each other, or conversely, unite in mocking both ladies. But in any case, the personal lives of women became a bargaining chip in these games. This system of mutual espionage created an atmosphere of total transparency. In the world of the Gilded Age, there were no secrets, only facts that had not yet been bought. Women lived as if under a glass dome, knowing that their every move could become known to their enemies. The betrayal of servants was the most painful because it came from those who were considered invisible. The realization that your own shadow was spying on you for another woman caused a feeling of deep insecurity and loneliness. Gradually, the luxurious mansion turned from a fortress into a maximum security prison for the woman, where her own servants were the guards. The fear of exposure, of judgmental glances or gossip, forced the mistress to constantly control herself, suppress her emotions, and live in a state of perpetual tension. It was a life on stage where the curtain never fell. Even at night, women began to fear their own rooms. They could not speak freely with their husbands, knowing that a servant might be standing outside the door. They could not cry, knowing that the maid would notice their swollen eyes. Naturalness and spontaneity disappeared, giving way to endless pretense and self-control. This fear gave rise to paranoia. The mistress began to think that the servants were whispering behind her back, that every glance was mocking. She began to look for a catch in every action of the staff, saw a conspiracy in a missing item or cold coffee. This psychological torture slowly destroyed the nervous system. Many women broke down under this pressure, falling ill or into depression. Seclusion became an attempt to hide from the all-seeing eyes, but even in illness, they remained dependent on those who brought them food and changed their beds. This was the price they paid for status and comfort. Freedom was exchanged for service. A woman received a perfectly tidy house and a served dinner, but lost the right to be herself within her own walls. The invisible chains of etiquette and supervision by servants were stronger than iron. Breaking them was only possible at the cost of social suicide, which only a few were willing to risk. Most preferred to quietly fade away in their golden cages under the watchful eye of the men in black. The tyranny of the servants was silent but absolute. It left no bruises on the body, but it left deep scars on the soul, turning life into an endless look over one's shoulder. When reputations did collapse and high society passed its judgment, the servants were the first to abandon the sinking ship. It was the final act of the tragedy. The house, which had been full of life and bustle just yesterday, was instantly emptied or filled with strangers, indifferent people describing the property for debts. The departure of the old servants was a sign of the final end of an era for a particular family. The servants left, taking with them stories that later became legends. They moved to new homes, and there, in new kitchens, they told of the downfall of their former mistress as an instructive parable. The story of the woman's tragedy became folklore, passed down by word of mouth, depriving her even of the right to be forgotten. For the woman herself, it was a time of terrible silence. After years of supervision and the noise of a large staff of servants, being left alone in empty rooms was a shock. But in this silence, there was also a bitter freedom. No one was watching, judging, or spying anymore. True, the price of this freedom was exorbitantly high. Her ruined reputation was a stigma that could not be washed away. The woman became an outcast, a ghost whom her former acquaintances and their servants no longer noticed on the street. The very doors that had once swung open for her were now closed forever, and the same doorman looked right through her. The legacy of this era is a reminder of the fragility of human dignity, of how easy it is to destroy a person without using physical force, but only through isolation and contempt, and that even the most beautiful house can be hell if there is no love and trust in it. These women are gone, but the echoes of their silent dramas still resonate within the old walls of mansions in New York and London. If you listen closely, you can hear whispers in the corridors, whispers that were once louder than screams. We have touched on one of the darkest and least visible sides of a glittering era. The story of servants and their mistresses is not just a tale of everyday life. It is a drama about power, fear, and loneliness. It shows that true bondage can hide behind velvet curtains, and that the most cruel wounds are inflicted without weapons. Behind every flawless facade lay real human pain that no one could share. I hope this story has allowed you to take a different look at the lives of women in the past and feel the price they paid for their position in society. What other secrets of the Victorian era would you like to uncover? Perhaps you are interested in the fate of governesses or the secrets of raising children in golden cages. Suggest your topics in the comments, and we will be sure to cover them in future videos. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into history.